Hey guys, it's Kaylee and welcome back to Hippie in a Suit, where I talk about sustainability because I dream of a world where women's rights are respected, upheld, and protected. Hi there and welcome to another deep dive in my SDG series. For those of you who are new to the channel, these videos go into detail on each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, because of the depth I go into, they tend to be a little bit lengthy, but at the end, I do summarize the goal in like 2 minutes. So if you just want a super high level overview, you can jump to that section by checking out the chapters in the description box below. And if you haven't already watched my primer on the SDGs, I do recommend checking that out first so that you understand the overall framework that each of these goals is a part of. Today, we are zooming in on SDG 9, which looks at industry, innovation, and infrastructure. A few years ago, I heard a statistic that has always stayed with me, and that was that 75% of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 does not exist today. Now, that was back in 2014, so it's not 100% accurate today, but it does show the magnitude of just how much infrastructure will be constructed and invested in the coming decades. The Global Infrastructure Hub estimates that number is somewhere around $94 trillion by 2040, and that is why it is so crucial that we consider infrastructure, industry, and innovation when we talk about sustainable development. And that's exactly what SDG 9 does and exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, now let's get into SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. SDG 9 is made up of 5 targets and 3 means of implementation that focus on sustainable and resilient infrastructure and industrialization. Another big component of this goal is science, research, technology, and innovation. Target 9.1. Develop quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure, including regional and trans-border infrastructure, to support economic and human well-being with a focus on affordable and equitable access for all. While the term infrastructure can be quite broad, it is usually used to describe the institutions and physical systems needed to run an economy and can be separated into 2 types, hard and soft. Hard infrastructure are the physical systems needed to support a modern economy, including transportation infrastructure such as bridges, roads, airports, and rail transport, water infrastructure such as water supply, water resources management, flood management, proper sewage and drainage systems, and coastal restoration infrastructure, power and energy infrastructure such as the power grid, power stations, wind turbines, gas pipelines, and solar panels, and telecommunications infrastructure such as telephone networks, broadband networks, and Wi-Fi services. Soft infrastructure is more service-oriented and includes political infrastructure such as government institutions like courts of law, regulatory bodies, and public security systems, educational infrastructure such as public schools and universities and public training institutes, health infrastructure such as public hospitals and subsidized health clinics, and recreational infrastructure such as public parks and gardens, beaches, historical sites, and nature reserves. Generally, within SDG 9, the term infrastructure focuses more on hard infrastructure and specifically transportation and telecommunication infrastructure because the other types have been covered in their own SDGs. This becomes evident by how this particular target is measured, which is by proximity to an all-seasons road and transport or freight volumes. The first indicator is commonly known as the Rural Access Index, or RAI, and measures the share of a country's rural population that lives within 2 kilometers of an all-season road. In rural areas in low and middle income economies, many people continue to lack vital access to an all-season road. With better roads, farmers and other business owners can bring products to market more efficiently, and families can more easily get to schools, hospitals, and other vital facilities. Enhancing rural road connectivity also helps in the long term by elevating agricultural productivity, business profitability, and employment. The second indicator looks at passenger and freight volumes, which are respectively measured in passenger kilometers and ton kilometers, and both are broken down by mode of transport. For the purposes of monitoring this indicator, passenger kilometer data are split between aviation, road, which is further broken down between passenger cars, buses, and motorcycles, and rail. And ton kilometers are split between aviation, road, rail, and inland waterways. The idea behind this indicator is that the movement of people and goods is crucial to a strong economy. Now let's look at where we are on these two indicators. For the Rural Access Indicator, data is only available in 25 countries, and based on the data from those countries, almost 300 million rural dwellers lack access to roads of a total rural population of approximately 520 million people. The RAI ranges from 95% in the UAE, 93% in Lebanon, and 87% in Bangladesh, to 17% in Zambia, and a little over 11% in Madagascar. But due to a much larger population, the number of actual people without access in Bangladesh is more than twice that in Zambia, 14 and 7 million respectively. Of all the countries with available data, Nigeria and Ethiopia have the most people without access to an all-season road, 70 million and 64 million respectively. For the passenger and freight volume, I'm just going to throw a bunch of numbers out there to give you an overview of the big picture. In 2019, developing economies accounted for 58% of goods loaded and 65% of goods unloaded at seaports worldwide. More than half of the containers handled at ports are concentrated in Eastern and Southeastern Asia. Together, Europe and North America rank second in terms of container port handling volumes at 22.9%, followed by Western Asia and North Africa at 8.4%, Latin America and the Caribbean at 6.5%, Central and Southern Asian at 3.9%, Africa at 2.3%, and Oceania at 1.6%. The air transport industry supported 65.5 million jobs globally, and the direct and indirect global economic impacts of air transport is estimated to be somewhere between $2.7 trillion US, which is equivalent to 3.6% of the world's GDP. In 2018, $6.8 trillion US worth of goods were expected to be transported internationally by air, representing 35% of world trade by value. Target 9.2. Promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and, by 2030, significantly raise industry's share of employment and gross domestic product in line with national circumstances and double its share in least developed countries. While this target states sustainable industrialization, what it's actually focused on is manufacturing. It calls for a doubling of the share of industry in least developed countries, or LDCs, to help them catch up with advanced economies. According to UNIDO, manufacturing has historically been considered an engine of economic growth. Rapid industrial growth has played a crucial role in job creation, resulting in the absorption of surplus labor from agriculture and other traditional sectors into the industrial sector that has higher wages. This can be seen by the economic success of high-income countries in Europe and North America. Thus, many see it as a particularly important factor for countries with a relatively low income level, and in particular LDCs. However, before we get too deep into this target, I think it's important to note that every country has its own unique economic structure, so focusing on manufacturing can be a little reductive. For example, a remote island country is going to have a very small share of manufacturing as a proportion of its economy, and a much higher proportion of their economy will likely come from tourism than other countries. And it will probably never really make sense for them to increase manufacturing capacity as a means of development because of resource availability, remoteness, and other factors. So it's important that we remember that while generalities are okay for global comparisons and targets, actual implementation requires approaching things on a case-by-case basis, taking unique contextual conditions into consideration. This target is measured by two indicators: manufacturing value added, MVA, as a proportion of GDP and per capita, and the share of manufacturing employment in total employment. I think the employment indicator is pretty straightforward, but let's get into manufacturing value added a little because it is more complex. The technical definition is the total estimate of net output of all resident manufacturing activity units obtained by adding up outputs and subtracting intermediate consumption. Now I realize that is a lot of jumbled words, so I think it will help if I break that down even a little bit further. Output is the value of the goods produced through manufacturing. Resident manufacturing is defining the scope of where that manufacturing takes place. So for the SDGs, that would be within a country. However, in general, the statistic is compiled by looking at economic zones because some territories function separately from the country that they are within. And intermediate consumption is effectively the inputs that are used in the manufacturing process. This could be energy, for example. This is a bit of a controversial indicator because it is difficult to compare the value of outputs in different countries. Let's take a really simplistic example that's not exactly manufacturing, but it does illustrate the point. A Big Mac costs $12.93 US dollars in Switzerland, but only $3.57 US dollars in South Africa. It's the exact same product, but its value is determined by where it's consumed. Now, if you imagine the same thing for every single good produced in every single country, you can see why it's so hard to compare the value of outputs across different countries, thus making this a little bit of a contentious indicator at very best. But nevertheless, let's see where we stand on this one. Until 2019, global MVA grew faster than GDP, resulting in an increasing share of manufacturing in the world economy overall. As a result of COVID, world manufacturing production plummeted by 6.8%, the largest single drop since the global financial crisis in 2009. The crisis did push forward one global trend, though, and that was the relative shift away from manufacturing in industrialized countries to developing economies. And this is partly influenced by offshoring activities and the relocation of manufacturing production to lower wage economies. Among the main economic sectors, manufacturing is the third largest sector in the world, with some 454 million workers, encompassing 13.7% of global employment in 2019. The majority of global manufacturing employment is concentrated in developing and emerging industrial economies. These countries employ 365 million people, accounting for around 80% of global manufacturing jobs in 2019. The largest manufacturing employer is China, with 150 million workers in 2019, accounting for 41% of all manufacturing jobs in developing and emerging economies, and 33% of manufacturing employment across the globe. Outside of this, the share of manufacturing employment was largest in Eastern and Southeastern Asia at 17.7% and smallest in Oceania, excluding Australia and New Zealand, at 3.3%, with Sub-Saharan Africa coming in at 6%. Target 9.3 increase the access of small-scale industrial and other enterprises, in particular in developing countries, to financial services including affordable credit and their integration into value chains and markets. This target highlights the importance of small-scale industrial enterprises in economies. They are a major source of employment and self-employment in developing and emerging economies, yet generally operate with a relatively small amount of capital investment and a predominantly local resource base. Hence, access to credit is particularly important for small-scale firms to increase their competitiveness. This target is measured by the proportion of small-scale industries in total industry value added and the proportion of small-scale industries with a loan or line of credit. While these are pretty straightforward indicators, the big challenge with measuring this is determining what counts as a small enterprise. UNIDO has been designated to determine a globally agreed upon definition, but generally data is still quite sparse on this particular target. Country and region-specific trends are very prevalent on this target as well. While the manufacturing value added produced by small-scale enterprises in Western, Central, and Southern Asia reveal very high shares of over 20%, the top performing country in Latin America and the Caribbean didn't even reach 10%. Globally, only 1 in 3 small industrial enterprises has a loan or a line of credit. However, access to financial services differ regionally. For instance, only 21.5% of small-scale industries in Sub-Saharan Africa receive loans or lines of credit, compared with almost half in Latin America and the Caribbean. Target 9.4. By 2030, upgrade infrastructure and retrofit industries to make them sustainable with increased resource use efficiency and greater adoption of clean and environmentally sound technologies and industrial processes, with all countries taking action in accordance with their respective capabilities. This target zooms in on the environmental sustainability of industrial development, calling on all industries to increase their resource use efficiency and the adoption of clean and environmentally sound technologies and industrial processes. It is measured by CO2 emissions per unit of value added, which is the ratio between CO2 emissions from fuel combustion and the value added of associated economic activities. The indicator can be computed for the whole economy by taking total CO2 emissions and putting it over GDP, or for specific sectors, notably the manufacturing sector, by taking CO2 emissions from manufacturing industries and putting it over the manufacturing value added. Between 2000 and 2014, almost all regions showed a reduction in CO2 emissions from manufacturing per unit of MVA. Europe and North America reduced their emissions intensity by 36% over this period, and all of the 10 largest manufacturing countries saw decreases. However, these reduction trends are not reflected in the global emissions intensity level, since a significant share of global MVA has moved to countries with poorer emissions performance. Global carbon dioxide emissions from fuel combustion declined slightly in 2019 from a historic high of 33.5 billion tons in 2018, thanks mainly to changes in power sources in advanced economies and milder weather conditions across the continents. Global carbon dioxide emissions from manufacturing continued their decline since 2014 and accounted for 5.9 billion tons in 2018. Now, I wanted to take a step away from the statistics here to give a little more commentary on this because it truly shows the complexity of sustainable development. As you've seen from these first 4 targets, industrial development is one of the most important sectors for lifting people out of poverty, but it also has very significant environmental impacts. It is absolutely clear that to live within our planetary boundaries, we must find more sustainable ways to lift people out of poverty. This will, of course, include increasing resource use efficiency and using renewable fuels in manufacturing, but it also must include building more circularity into our economies. Now, I will do a full video on circularity, but for the purposes of this video, it means everything from better designing products so they are less wasteful, favoring services and knowledge products over physical products, and of course, the classic reduce, reuse, and recycle. Target 9.5, enhance scientific research, upgrade the technological capabilities of industrial sectors in all countries, in particular developing countries, including by 2030, encouraging innovation and substantially increasing the number of research and development workers per million people, and public and private research and development spending. Research and experimental development, or R&D, is the creative and systemic work undertaken in order to increase the stock of knowledge, including knowledge of science, humankind, culture, and society, and to devise new applications for that available knowledge. Virtually everything we rely on today is the product of R&D, from post-it notes to power grids to the internet and vaccines. So I think it goes without saying that it is crucial to sustainability and human development. This target is measured by 2 indicators: research and development expenditure as a proportion of GDP and researchers per million inhabitants. To expand a little, the first one is the expenditure on R&D activities, including basic research, applied research, and experimental development, as a percentage of total GDP of a given country. And the second one is a count of researchers in R&D, which is defined as professionals engaged in the conception or creation of new knowledge, products, processes, methods, or systems, and in the management of projects concerned. Postgraduate PhD students engaged in R&D are included in the official counts. So how are we doing on this one? Well, global investments in R&D have continued to grow at a good pace over the past 2 decades, reaching $2.2 trillion in 2018, up from $1.4 trillion in 2010 and $742 billion in 2000. This represented an average annual growth rate of 4.4% over the period when adjusted for inflation. While Europe and North America lead global investments in R&D, representing 47.4%, Eastern and Southeastern Asia have been catching up by increasing their share from 22.6% in 2000 to 32.2% in 2010 and 40.6% in 2018, a very high average annual growth rate of 7.9% over that period. Relatively, the proportion of GDP invested in R&D has increased from 1.5% in 2000 to 1.73% in 2018. However, this global figure hides the wide differences between various regions. Europe and North America and Eastern and Southeastern Asia stand at 2.28 and 2.12% respectively, which is of course above the world average of 1.73%. But most developing regions fell short of the world average. Sub-Saharan Africa is just 0.37%, and Northern Africa and West Asia have only 0.86%. For LDCs, the average was even lower at 0.2%. Now let's look at the researcher side. The number of them worldwide has leaped from 4.9 million in 2000 to 7.1 million in 2010 to 9.4 million in 2018, representing an average annual growth rate of about 3.7%. In relative terms globally, the number of researchers per million inhabitants shifted from 801 in 2000 and 1,022 in 2010 to 1,235 in 2018. The regional situation regarding researchers per million inhabitants also shows wide disparity across regions, very similar to the last indicator on investment. In Europe and North America, there are 3,847 researchers per million inhabitants, whereas this number is as low as 99 in Sub-Saharan Africa. There's also a gender dimension here. Globally, women accounted for only 30.5% of total researchers, which also showed wide variations across regions. While Latin America and the Caribbean have about 44.9% of female researchers, the share is only 23.1% and 21.3% in Southern Asia and Eastern Asia, respectively. Okay, so that's the main targets, but this goal also has 3 means of implementation targets focused on finance, technology, research, innovation, and ICT. I'm going to quickly read those to you. Target 9A. Facilitate sustainable and resilient infrastructure development in developing countries through enhanced financial, technological, and technical support to African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. Target 9B, support domestic technology development, research, and innovation in developing countries, including by ensuring a conducive policy environment for inter alia, industrial diversification, and value addition to commodities. Target 9C, significantly increase access to information and communications technology and strive to provide universal and affordable access to the internet in least developed countries by 2020. Now, normally I don't really talk about the means of implementation, but I did want to make just 2 comments here because I think they are quite interesting. First, not all manufacturing is created equally. 9A and 9B call for technology, research, and innovation, and this is because more technologically complex products provide more economic benefit for countries and people. Medium and high technology products continue to dominate manufacturing production in industrialized economies. However, developing regions led by China are catching up quickly. In 2018, the share of medium and high technology manufacturing in total manufacturing was 49% in developed regions and 41.4% in developing regions, compared to only 8.9% in least developed countries. The second thing I wanted to point your attention towards is on the ICT side of things. It probably goes without saying, but connectivity is crucial in today's day and age for education and economic development. In 2020, almost the entire world population lived within range of a mobile network, with 85% covered by a 4G network. Between 2015 and 2020, global 4G coverage has doubled. However, coverage does not necessarily mean usage. Only 51% of the population used the internet in 2019, leaving 3.7 billion people without internet access. In LDCs, only 1 in 5 people were online in 2020, failing to achieve the target of universal and affordable internet access. Okay, that's all I've got for you on SDG 9. Let's summarize and close this one out. SDG 9 focuses on industry, innovation, and infrastructure and is made up of 5 targets and 3 means of implementation that focus on sustainable and resilient infrastructure and industrialization, as well as science, research, technology, and innovation. Target 9.1 is concerned with access to transport in a range of forms from roads to aviation to rail transport for both people and freight. While data is lacking, we know that at least 330 million rural inhabitants lack access to basic road infrastructure. Target 9.2 calls for an increase in manufacturing capacity, particularly in least developed countries. Manufacturing is the third largest sector in the world, with some 454 million workers, encompassing 13.7% of global employment, but LDCs still have a long way to go to reap its benefits. Target 9.3 shines a light on the importance of small enterprises in economies and specifically the need to ensure they have adequate access to finance. While it ranges greatly by region, small enterprises make up between 10 to 20% of manufacturing value add, but only 1 in 3 small industrial enterprises has a loan or a line of credit. Target 9.4 zooms in on environmental sustainability and industrial development. While many countries and regions are lowering emissions intensity, the shift of more manufacturing to countries with poor emissions performance continues to be a challenge. Target 9.5 looks at R&D both through expenditure and number of researchers. While we are globally on an upward trend for both of these indicators, there are wide regional discrepancies and women remain way underrepresented in R&D. This goal also has 3 means of implementation targets focused on finance, technology, research, innovation, and ICT. And that's SDG 9. And that's it. That's all I have for you. If you learned something in today's video, give it a like, and I will be back very soon with SDG 10 on reducing inequality. Thank you so much for being here yet again. And as always, don't forget to check out the blog post if you want more information or to continue learning about this topic. See you in the next one, and until then, keep fighting the good fight. Bye!